At the start of the drama, Mr. Huo makes an entry in his car, and the assistant says, "You had said that you would never agree to get married." Mr. Huo says, "I'm only getting married because Grandpa told me to. When will that girl arrive?" The assistant says, "She's on the way." Huo says, "I'm here to get married, not to do some hijack. All of you get out of here." So the assistant and the bodyguards leave. Just then, the female lead Xining receives a call while riding a scooter, and Xining says, "What did that guy say?" On the phone, her friend says, "Yes, he'll give you 80,000 right after the wedding." And Xining recalls that the doctor had asked for 80,000 for Grandma's treatment. And while thinking, she crashes her scooter into Huo, and both of them start looking at each other. Xining apologizes. Huo thinks, maybe she is the same girl I have to marry, and says, "Come inside, quickly." Xining says, "Anyway, I was going to give you my whole body." Huo says, "What? I just want the marriage certificate." And both of them go inside. Just then, outside, a guy says to a girl, "Here's 80,000, let's go." The girl says, "But the deal was for 3 million. The guy says, "I'll bring 10 for 3 million. And the girl throws the card and walks away. Meanwhile, Xining looks at the marriage certificate and Huo says, "Here, take your 3 million. Xining says, 3 million? Huo says, "Take 10 million. Don't be too greedy now." And before Xining can say anything, he gives her a phone and says, "Save your number. I'll call you after a year for divorce," and leaves. A year later, Xining gets a call. "Reach the marriage office in half an hour. Today is our divorce." And the call disconnects, and Xining starts looking for the marriage certificate. She asks Grandma, "Have you seen my marriage certificate? Small and red-colored?" Grandma gives Xining the certificate. Xining says, "Look at the condition of this." Grandma says, "I had kept it downstairs. What happened? Did it tear?" Xining says, "No, let it go now." Huo arrives at the marriage office, and the assistant says, "These gifts were sent by Grandpa." Huo says, "On the day of divorce, I'll gift her all this?" The assistant says, "He thinks today is your first anniversary." And Huo says, "All right, just give all this to that girl." Just then, the assistant talks on the phone and tells Huo, "It was the doctor's call. Grandpa is refusing to take treatment." And Huo drives home in his car. At the same time, Xining arrives at the marriage office, and the bodyguard says, "Sir told me to give you these gifts." Seeing the gifts, Xining says, "All these gifts are for me?" And at home, Xining tries out all the gifts. And just then, she receives a call. "You've been selected in the Huo group's interview round. You'll have to come to the office tomorrow." And Xining says, "Thank you," and cuts the call. Next day, Xining stands in the elevator, and an old-aged uncle also enters the lift. When the lift doesn't work, the manager Anna pushes the uncle out. Xining says, "How can you treat an old man like this? Apologize to him." Anna says, "Me?" and apologize. "Do you know, I know Mr. Huo personally. I don't need to apologize to anyone." And she walks away. Xining says, "Uncle, are you all right?" The uncle says, "Thank you, child. By the way, what's your name?" Xining tells her name. And the uncle says, "Do you work here?" Xining says, "No, I have an interview here today." The uncle says, "You'll definitely get selected." And both of them get into the lift. Xining is called into the cabin, and Xining is shocked. Meanwhile, in Huo's cabin, Grandpa arrives and says, "You rascal boy." Huo says, "Grandpa, you haven't recovered yet. How did you come here?" Grandpa says, "I don't need to ask you. It's been a year. I want to meet your wife." Huo says, "All right, but you'll have to recover first." Grandpa says, "Okay then, I'll come after a month. By the way, there's an interview of a girl named Xining here. Give her the job." Huo says, "It doesn't work like that. A job is given based on talent only." Grandpa says, "She must be talented, but her heart is very pure." Huo says, "Okay, Grandpa, you rest now." Grandpa says, "I can go by myself." Meanwhile, Xining sits down to give the interview. Anna looks at Xining and says, "Get out." Xining says, "But at least check my resume." Anna says, "I don't need to check all this," and throws Xining's documents. Xining angrily starts to walk out. As soon as she steps out of the cabin, she bumps into Mr. Huo. The assistant asks, "Who is Xining here?" And Xining raises her hand. Mr. Huo tells Xining to join as an assistant intern. Xining leaves happily. In the next scene, a senior misbehaves with Xining and she slaps him. The senior says, "You're acting with me. You must have convinced Mr. Huo for the job the same way." Just then, Mr. Huo arrives and Xining says, "This man was misbehaving with me." The senior says, "Not me, this girl is after me. Fire her right now." Huo says, "Not her. You leave this office." The senior holds Huo's hand and says, "I made a mistake. I have small children. Please give me one chance." But Huo walks away. Huo asks the assistant, "What was the name of the girl you found for the marriage?" The assistant says, "Shuyan." Huo says, "Are you sure?" The assistant says, "Yes, sure." And the assistant gives Xining a file to read outside. But Huo and Xining bump into each other. Xining walks away with the file, and the marriage certificate falls onto the table in between. The senior goes into Huo's cabin and says, "Sir, please don't fire me." But Anna is there and says, "I can help you, but you'll have to help me fire Xuning." The senior agrees, and Anna starts kissing Huo's photo. Just then, Mr. Huo enters and says, "When did you come?" Anna says, "My earring had fallen here." And Huo says, "How did you come in without my permission?" Anna leaves. Outside, Anna says to Xuning, "What are you doing here?" Xuning says, "Came to give the file." Seeing the file, Anna says, "Oh, so you want to give this wrong list to Huo?" Xuning says, "The department gave me this list." Anna stops Xuning from giving the file. Just then, Huo arrives and asks, "What's going on?" Xuning says, "I don't know anything about a wrong list. I came to give the file to Mr. Huo." And when Mr. Huo checks the camera, the senior is seen making changes in the file. Then Mr. Huo fires both the senior and Xuning from the job. Just then, the assistant comes and says, "Sir, your marriage certificate is lost somewhere." Huo calls his wife and says, "Sorry for yesterday. Why are you crying?" Xuning says, "Nothing, you tell me." Huo says, "We'll have to take the divorce a few days later. Maybe I'll have to call you home too. I'll give you more money." Xuning says, "There's no need. I needed the money for someone's treatment. You can take it back if you want." Huo says, "Okay, and my marriage certificate is lost. Do you have it?" Xuning says, "Even at my office today, someone's marriage certificate was lost." Huo says, "Are you really okay? We're not truly married, but if there's any problem, you can tell me." Xuning says, "I'm fine, just that my boss fired me from the office." Huo says, "Surely your boss must be blind." Xuning says, "Yes, totally blind." And the two meet while talking. And Xuning, while walking away, says, "He talks behind my back, not to my face." And Huo says, "Calm down. Whatever happens, keep texting me." Xuning goes upstairs and asks, "Who does Mr. Huo have a meeting with today?" The office girl says, "Maybe with Mr. Zhao." Then Xuning picks up her bag and leaves. In the next scene, Xuning comes and gives a tablet to Mr. Huo. And Mr. Huo says, "How do you know about my tablet?" Xuning says, "I found out everything. Today, you have a meeting with Mr. Zhao. You'll drink, then you'll need a hangover tablet." Huo says, "And why did you do all this?" Xuning says, "I have to prove that I'm a good assistant. You fired me without giving any reason." Huo says, "You were careless. You weren't responsible for your work." Xuning blocks his way and says, "Can't you give me one chance, just for a month?" Huo recalls everything and says, "All right, but what if you fail?" Xuning says, "I'll pay you money," and gives him a card. The card looks familiar to Huo, but looking at Xuning's face, he doesn't take it, and Xuning happily sends a smiling message to her husband. Next day, Anna sees Xuning in the office and says, "Weren't you fired by Mr. Huo?" Xuning says, "He hired me back too." Hearing this makes Anna furious. Xuning gives coffee to Mr. Huo. Huo tastes it and says, "It's not that bad." Outside, Anna says to Xuning, "Tell the truth, are you Mr. Huo's secret wife?" Xuning says, "Looks like you drank too much," and walks away. In the basement, Anna takes photos from a man and says, "I asked you to find Huo's wife, not this girl. Go and check again." Just then, the senior arrives and says to Anna, "You promised to bring me back to the company. I won't leave you." Anna throws a stick and says, "We both have the same enemy, Xuning." And she explains her plan to him. Anna tells Xuning, "Today you have to go pick up our special client, Mr. He." Xuning says, "Okay, I'll go right now." Huo sees Xuning leaving and says, "She even leaves during office hours. Let's see where she's going." Xuning, standing outside a room, says, "Mr. He, are you ready? I've come to pick you up." Just then, the senior drags Xuning into the room and assaults her. Outside, Huo sees Xuning's earring and knocks on the door. Inside, the senior hears Huo's voice and gets scared. And Xuning, under the effect of drugs, opens the door. Huo says, "What happened to you?" Xuning points inside and hugs Huo, saying, "I knew you'd come." Huo adjusts her clothes, picks her up in his arms, and tells the assistant, "Someone must have drugged her. I'm taking her to the hospital. Find out who was here." In the next scene, when Xuning regains consciousness, Huo says, "You're awake?" Xuning says, "How did I end up in the hospital?" Huo says, "If I hadn't brought you, you would have eaten me alive." Xuning says, "What do you mean?" And seeing the kiss mark, she remembers everything. Huo says, "I didn't know you booked a room with someone." Xuning says, "I didn't book it. I went to pick up our client, Mr. He." Huo says, "But I don't know any such client. Who told you to go?" Xuning says, "Anna did." And the assistant enters and says, "Anna, Mr. Huo is calling you." At the hospital, Xuning, munching chips, says to Mr. Huo, "Give me that serum." Huo says, "Me?" Then opens the serum and applies it on Xuning's face. Xuning says, "Our company products are so easy to use." Huo says, "What are you thinking? If you praise me, I'll do your work every day." Just then the assistant comes and says, "Anna is here." Huo asks Anna, "You sent Xuning to pick up client Mr. He? But I don't remember any such client." Anna says, "I only knew the name." Inside, Xuning quietly starts listening to their conversation. Huo says, "Then how did the senior get into the room? The one I fired from the office. Anna says, I didn't know he was Mr. He, and on Huo's order, Anna leaves. Huo opens the door, and Xining falls into his arms. Just then, Xining's grandma arrives. Xining says, Grandma, you're here? Grandma looks at Huo and says, Is this boy your husband? Xining says, No. Grandma says, But he's the one in the marriage certificate. Xining says, That's a different boy. This is my boss. Grandma says, Yeah, maybe I'm getting old. And just then, Huo calls Xining and says, Let me make one thing clear. I don't like you, and I absolutely don't like romance in the office. I think you got it. And he leaves. From behind, Xining says, Yeah, well, I don't like you either, and says to Grandma, Let's go home. At home, Xining looks at the marriage certificate and thinks, My husband and Mr. Huo have the same dress, but my husband must be more handsome, and she falls asleep. Next day, Mr. Huo tells Xining to bring coffee, and Xining forgets her diary there. Huo reads the diary and says, Xining writes every day. How much I liked him. Meanwhile, outside, Xining looks for her diary and starts working. In the cabin, Huo says, I explained to her even yesterday. Looks like I'll have to lie again so that she doesn't like me. And Huo returns the diary to Xining. Xining thinks, Mr. Huo must have read my diary. Now he'll think I'm responsible. At night, Huo comes near Xining's chair and thinks, What happens to me the moment I come near her? Then nervously says, I'm gay, and runs away. Xining says, Why did he tell me this? Maybe he trusts me, and that's why he's getting a divorce. Then she laughs and says, Boss, I won't tell your secret to anyone. Next day, Huo comes to the office and seeing Xining thinks, Why does she still like me? Then says, Today for the dinner with the client, Anna and Xining will come. At the meeting, Huo meets the client and Xining orders dinner, but Anna says, Whatever she ordered, change it. When the food comes during the meeting, the client says, I already told you, I'm allergic to this food. And Anna comes and says, Xining, what did you order? The client says, Looks like you don't want to work with us, and throws the contract. Huo says, She's a new intern, she doesn't know much. Please have a seat. Just then, the hotel chef comes and apologizes, saying, We sent the wrong order. We are sorry. A little while later, the client speaks on the phone to his wife and says, I'm bringing your anniversary gift now. Just then, Xining hands him a gift bag and says, This is a gift from us for your wife. The client says, My wife really likes your products. We can finalize this deal. As soon as the client leaves, Huo yells at Anna and says, Whatever you did today was very wrong. Leave now. Meanwhile, Xining, talking and having drunk a bit much, falls on Huo. In the car, Huo asks Xining her address, and when the brake is applied, a kiss happens between the two. Just then, Grandma calls and says on the phone, Dear, you haven't come home yet? Huo says, I'm her boss speaking. She's had a drink. Please give me your address. I'll bring her home. Huo takes Xining to her room and sees the marriage certificate kept nearby and asks Grandma, Grandma, is Xining married? Grandma says, Yes, she had to marry in a hurry, and her husband hasn't come back for a year. And Grandma shows the marriage certificate to Huo. Huo says, Why is this photo so blurry? Grandma says, I had put it down in the cupboard, that's why. Huo thinks, She hid the fact that she's married, and I thought she liked me, and leaves angrily. Next day, Xining says good morning to Huo, but Huo walks into the cabin and everyone starts laughing at Xining. Just then, Huo comes and says to Xining, Take this file, and in a few days you'll become an employee from intern. And to Anna he says, From today, you'll bring coffee for me, and walks away. Anna mixes something in the coffee and gives it to Huo. Xining goes to Mr. Huo's cabin, but there Anna says, Mr. Huo has drunk too much, he's resting in the hotel, and Xining leaves. Anna talks to someone on the phone and says, Xining has left from here, and I've sent a message to Mr. Huo's wife from his phone. As soon as she comes there, take her to your room. And after cutting the call says, Today, neither Huo's wife's honor will be saved nor Xining's. At the hotel, Huo goes to bathe while drunk. Just then, Xining enters the room and Huo, holding Xining in the bathroom, starts kissing her under the influence. In the morning, Anna gets a call. Mr. Huo and Xining were together the whole night, and she gets angry. Meanwhile, seeing herself with Mr. Huo, Xining says, I slept with my boss. I've cheated. But my husband told me to come to this room. That means Mr. Huo is my husband. No, something is wrong. And she calls her husband. Anna picks up the call and says, Your husband is with me. And Xining happily says, That means Mr. Huo is not my husband because my husband is with that girl. Xining, while sleeping, grabs Huo's nose, and when he wakes up, she gets scared, picks up her clothes, and runs away. In the next scene, Huo tells his assistant, I was drugged. Find out who was behind all this and why didn't Xining come to the office? The assistant says, She's not feeling well. She's on leave today. Huo says, She's not well? And goes to meet Xining. Xining calls her husband and says, Yesterday I called you, but a girl picked up and said you're with her. Just then, Huo shows up outside, and Xining says, I'll call later, someone's outside. Seeing Huo, she runs into the room. Grandma says, Come inside, dear, and gives Huo an apple, asking, are you married? Huo says, yes. Grandma says, you and Xining would have made a good couple. Huo says, I'm about to get divorced. Grandma says, Xining is also about to get divorced, but I really like you two together. Huo thinks, looks like Xining's husband is not a good man. Just then, Xining comes there, and Huo says, I heard you're not well. And last night? Xining says, forget whatever happened last night. You were drunk, okay? Huo says, no, I did wrong. Xining says, then what should we do now? Huo says, I'm going to get divorced soon. Xining says, I'm fine. You can go. Huo grabs Xining and says, until you're fine, I'll stay right here. Xining says, I'll call my husband. Huo says, fine, call him. Huo thinks, but Grandma said her husband hasn't come for a year and is about to divorce her. Xining says, fine, I'll call. But Huo stops her and leaves. After Huo leaves, Xining calls her husband and says, yesterday a girl picked up your phone. Huo says, but my phone wasn't with me and there's nothing in the phone history either. Xining says, maybe she deleted it. She also said you two were together. Huo thinks, she really thinks she's my wife, and asks, so is there a problem with us being together? Xining says, why would I have a problem? Do whatever you want. Anyway, last night even I was with someone. Huo says, our marriage is fake. You can do whatever you want. Xining says, okay, now tell me, do you like that girl? Huo says, I don't know, but she likes me. That's why we should get divorced soon. Our divorce will be in 7 days. Xining says, okay, and cuts the call. In the next scene, a lady says to Anna, you're the one who told me on call that my husband is having an affair, right? Anna says, yes, they're meeting today for a meeting. Meanwhile, in the office, Huo asks about Xining and the assistant says, she's gone to meet Mr. Wang. Huo says, I said not to send her alone? Let's go to her now. At the hotel, Xining is getting papers signed by Mr. Wang when Wang's wife comes and grabs Xining saying, I know you two are having an affair. I won't spare you, and starts hitting Xining. Just then, Huo comes and says, let her go. Mr. Wang says, she made a mistake, I apologize. Please sign the contract. Huo tears up the contract and says, I don't like my company's employee being insulted. We can't work together anymore. Xining says, this contract is important for us. Huo says, you're more important, understand? And leaves with Xining. Huo applies medicine to Xining, and she says, I'm sorry, all this happened because of me. Huo says, it's not your fault. Xining moves closer and asks, are you doing all this because of that night? Huo replies, you're crazy. Tomorrow you have your test, then you can join the design department. Xining happily says, okay. At the office, the assistant explains the assignment rules, and Huo says, you all have to submit the assignment in 3 days. Whoever gives their best will be promoted. Xining works late into the night and leaves the file in the office. Just then, Anna sneaks in, steals the design, and says, now let's see how you become an employee here. Xining steps out of the office, but it starts raining heavily. Huo appears with an umbrella and says, come on, I'll drop you home. Xining says, okay. In the rain, they look at each other, and Huo comes close, but Xining says, I need to go back to the office. There's something I forgot. Huo says, no, it's too late now, and they leave together. 3 days later, Anna distributes the designs and says, you all need to rate each other's designs. Xining stands and says, these are my designs. Anna says, I worked 3 days on these designs, and you want to claim them as yours? Everyone starts blaming Xining. Huo says, enough. Xining, do you have any proof? Xining says, you have the first draft, which is very simple and reflects the purity of our product, but I have the next design. Anna is shocked after seeing the second design. Huo says, Xining, from tomorrow you can join the design team. Xining says, thank you, Mr. Huo. Next day, the assistant announces, from today, Xining will be the head of the design team, and Anna will be the second leader. Xining thanks everyone. Anna says, you got all this just because you slept with Mr. Huo, right? Xining says, how do you know everything? You're the one who drugged Mr. Huo, right? Anna says, stop your nonsense. Xining continues, and you're the one who told the waiter to lock the room, right? Anna says, what waiter? I don't know anything, got it? And walks away. In the next scene, Xining gives a file to Mr. Huo and says, did you find out who gave you drugs that day? Huo says, not yet. Xining says, maybe Anna did all this. She knew everything about that night, and she's the one who gave me the hotel address too. Huo, thinking, says, I'll look into it. Don't stress. That night, while walking, Xining is surrounded by some men, and Anna is there too. Anna says, like this girl? Take her for the night. Xining starts crying. Just then, Huo appears and yells, leave her, and starts beating the guys. One of them hits Huo on the head, and Xining takes him away. At home, Xining applies medicine to Huo and says, thank you for saving me. Huo says, you're my employee, and according to office rules, your safety is important. Just then, the assistant arrives and asks, are you all right? From tomorrow, bodyguards will be with both of you. Huo says, why both of us? The assistant says, because you like Xining. Xining, shocked, says, you like me. Huo says, you liked me first. You even told Grandma and wrote it in your diary. Xining says, I wrote that for everyone in the office and Grandma didn't even know. Huo asks, so that means you're rejecting me? Xining says, no, think whatever you want, and walks away. The assistant says, Mr. Huo, tell me honestly, do you like her? Huo says, yeah, no, I'd like a good girl, not someone who talks so much. The assistant says, you love her. I've never seen you care about anyone like this before. Huo says, really? You think so? Just then, Xuning shows up with a tiffin and says, forget everything. I made lunch. Eat first. The assistant sees the bracelet and thinks, this is the same one Mr. Huo gave his wife. Xuning says, my husband gifted this to me. Huo says, what a ridiculous gift. The assistant says, it's expensive. The bracelet Mr. Huo gave his wife was just like this. Xuning says, he probably doesn't even know how to give gifts. There's food kept. Eat it if you want, and walks away. Huo says to the assistant, was it necessary to bring up my wife? Tomorrow is her birthday. Her table should have the best gifts, got it? Now go. Next day, Xuning says, what is all this? Everyone says, these are gifts for you from Mr. Hu. Looks like you're the reason for his divorce. Xuning says, these must be for someone else. I'll find out. Meanwhile, Anna sees the gifts angrily and thinks, could Xuning be Mr. Huo's wife? I'll never let that happen. Xuning goes to Huo and asks, did you place the gifts on the table? Huo says, why? Better than your husband's gift, right? Xuning says, I don't want any of this. Remove them. Huo says, remove them? Why, didn't you like them? I can get something else. Xuning says, why are you doing all this? Huo yells, because I like you very much. Xuning says, but I don't want to be the reason for your divorce. You have a wife, and I have a husband. We're not alone. It's better we stay away. Give those gifts to your wife. And walks away. Outside, she calls her husband and says, if someone gifts you something, do you reject it? Her husband says, someone gave you a gift? If you want, I'll send you one too. Xuning says, did you tell your wife about our divorce? He replies, forget that. If you want gifts, I'll send them. Just then, Huo walks out and says to Xuning, what are you doing? Xuning replies, what are you doing? Huo says, I'm talking to my wife. Now go. Later inside, Huo gets on the phone and says to Xuning, sorry, I hung up earlier. What were you saying? Xuning says, my useless boss is always following me around. Huo says, you always talk about him. You know what? Join my company instead. Xuning says, he's not that bad. Huo asks, so you like him? Xuning says, a little. Just then the assistant comes and says, Xuning is outside plucking leaves from the tree. Huo rushes outside. Meanwhile, Anna uses Huo's phone to call his wife and waits at a cafe. Outside, Xuning arrives and calls her husband, saying, you asked me to meet you. I'm here. Her husband replies, I didn't ask you to come. We'll meet Grandpa soon and get the divorce. Anna steps out, but Xuning already walks away. That night, Grandma sees Huo outside and tells Xuning, your boss is standing outside. Xuning says, I'll go ask him. She goes down and asks Huo, what are you doing here? Huo says, how did you know I was here? Xuning says, Grandma saw you. Huo says, I like you, Xuning. I know you like me too. So why can't we be together? Xuning says, because we're married. Huo says, I only married for Grandpa's sake. We only met on the wedding day. I don't even remember her face. Xuning thinks, our stories are exactly the same. Huo says, just give me 3 days. And the two kiss. Next day, Huo calls Anna and says, you're the one who drugged me that night. Anna says, it was all because of Xuning. Huo says, I know the truth. It's better you leave the office. Anna leaves. Huo tells the assistant, call a lawyer right away. I want a divorce. After that, Xuning and I will get married. Outside, Anna overhears and thinks, I'll never let them be together. Anna starts packing her things and finds Huo and Xuning's marriage certificate. Xuning says, give that certificate back to me. Anna says, this is mine. I won't give it to you. Looking at the certificate, Anna thinks, Xuning is Huo's real wife. Maybe they don't know this. I'll never let them be together now. Anna gets the name of Huo's wife from a guy, and the man says, Huo was supposed to marry Shu Yan. And Shu Yan gives a photo to Anna. In the cafe, Shu Yan says to Anna, I'll take a full 1 lakh for your work. And Anna gives the card and says, the work must get done. Outside the marriage office, Huo calls his wife. Just then, Shu Yan comes and drops the phone and says, hi Huo, I'm your wife. Huo says, you look very different. And Shu Yan says, yes, I got surgery done. And Shu Yan tells Xuning to leave and Xuning goes away angrily. Huo says, are you really the girl I married? And Shu Yan shows her ID and says, look at my card. I am Shu Yan. There, Xuning calls her husband, and Huo gives his phone to be repaired, and while waiting, Xuning leaves. There, Huo gives the divorce papers to Shu Yan and says, sign this. And Shu Yan tears the papers and says, never. And Huo yells and says, what are you doing? You said you'd sign. And Shu Yan says, I lied. I want more money. What will I get after divorce? And Huo says, I gave you 10 million. Shu Yan says, I want 100 million. And Huo says, I thought you were a good girl, but you turned out to be a very cheap girl. Just then, Grandpa comes and says, what's going on here? And Shu Yan says, Grandpa, I'm your daughter-in-law. And Grandpa gives a card to Shu Yan and says, there's 3 million in it, a gift from my side. and Huo takes the card and says, "She's not my wife. We're getting a divorce. This girl loves money. Even after getting so much, she's asking for 100 million. Just then, Huo's phone is repaired, and he sees his wife's message and thinks, this girl must be someone else. Outside, Shuyan says to Anna, he trusted my words and even deleted Shuning's number. And Anna says, I'll handle all that. Shuyan says, you take Huo and give me the money. Deal? In the next scene, everyone in the office talks about how Huo and his wife are not getting divorced. Just then, Shuyan comes to the office and throws Shuning out, and Shuning starts to feel dizzy. Just then, Huo comes and catches Shuning, and Shuning says, let go of me. Did I tell you to get divorced? Huo says, something surely happened. Tell me the truth. Shuning says, in the office, they're making fun of me, saying I broke your marriage. Huo says, tell me who said it. I'll throw them out right now. Shuning says, what difference does it make? Now that your divorce isn't happening, we should separate. Huo says, even you didn't get divorced. Have you started loving him? Shuning says, I don't need to explain anything, and starts to leave. Just then, Huo says, why are you going outside? Shuning says, because I've been shifted to the marketing department, and leaves. Huo says to the assistant, find out who Shuning's husband is and who's spreading rumors in the office. At night, while walking, some boys surround Shuning and say, tell us, who will you go with among us? Shuning says, I'll give you money. Leave me. And the boys take her phone. Just then, Huo comes and hugs Shuning, and Shuning says, where were you? I was very scared. Huo says, I'm sorry, I won't go anywhere now. Huo says, even in the office you weren't feeling well. Why did you come here? Shuning says, sorry, I said a bit too much. Huo says, it's okay. I know all that happened because of Shuyan. She's asking for 100 million for divorce. Shuning says, 100 million? How cunning she is. Huo says, but why didn't your divorce happen? Shuning says, that guy never showed up, and now even my phone got stolen. Huo says, okay, you go and rest now. Shuning starts to leave and Huo grabs her and starts kissing her. Shuning says, now I should go, and she leaves. The next day, Huo reads his wife's message and says to Shuyan, who is standing nearby, you are not my wife. Shuyan says, my phone was stolen. This is someone else. Huo says, okay, so what's my private phone number? Shuyan says, I don't remember. Huo says, tell the truth, or I'll call the police. And Shuyan leaves in fear. Huo calls his wife and says, we'll get the divorce tomorrow. Wear a blue flower and come. Meanwhile, Shuyan overhears this conversation on the camera. The next day, Shuning is ready with a blue flower, and Shuyan, wearing a blue flower, comes to meet Huo and says, you called me here today. And Huo deletes his wife's number. Outside, some people kidnap Shuyan. Huo says to Shuyan, I want the divorce now. Shuyan says, okay, not 100 million. Now give me 200 million first. Just then, Huo gets a call. Shuning's grandmother has come to meet, and Huo goes to the grandmother, who says, Shuning is in some trouble. I couldn't reach her phone. I heard her screaming. Huo says to the grandmother, give me your husband's number. And the grandmother says, her last number was 1356, and Huo is shocked to hear this. Just then, a call from the kidnappers comes, and Huo says, where is Shuning? What do you want? Tell me. The kidnapper says, come here, and plays the sound of Shuning being beaten. Huo says, leave her. I'll come now. And he tells the assistant, take the grandmother away. And the grandmother says, you'll bring her back, right? Huo says, yes. And Huo sits down, and the assistant comes and says, the location is some basement. And Huo, thinking deeply, runs to find Shuning. Meanwhile, the kidnapper tells Shuning, now I will burn every part of your body. And Shuning says, who are you? What do you want? And the kidnapper removes her mask and says, I'm Anna, and I want Huo. Understand? Just then, Huo arrives and saves Shuning, and Anna runs away. Shuning is trying to stand, but due to her injury, she falls on Huo. At the hospital, Shuning opens her eyes and says to Huo, what happened to me? And Huo remembers the doctor telling him, Shuning was pregnant, but we couldn't save the baby due to the injury. And Huo tells the doctor, don't tell Shuning about this. Huo says to Shuning, it's nothing, you'll be fine. And Shuning says, I thought I would die in the basement. And Huo hugs Shuning and says, I'm sorry, I didn't take care of you. And Shuning says, don't think like that, everything will be fine now. And wiping Huo's tears, she says, that kidnapper was Anna. And Huo, in anger, says, you rest, I have some work. Outside, Huo tells the assistant, the kidnapper was Anna, find her quickly and get her arrested. Shuyan visits Shuning in the hospital and says, I brought the same bad fruit like you. And Shuning says, it would be better if you leave. And Shuyan says, after your baby died, you shouldn't be talking like this. And Shuning gets shocked and starts crying, saying to Huo, why didn't you tell me the truth? Huo says, what truth? And Shuning says, our baby, tell me, Huo. Where is our baby? It's all my fault. And Huo holds Shuning and says, our baby will come again. And Shuning says, Anna killed our baby. And Huo says, I know, she will definitely be punished. In the next scene, the assistant says, I checked the details, your wife is not Shu Yan, it's someone else. And Xining says, Mr. Huo doesn't even know who his wife is. And Huo says, you don't even know your husband. And Xining says, whoever finds their wife or husband will stay in that partner's house, deal. And Huo agrees. And Xining calls her husband, but the number is blocked. And Huo, laughing, says, your husband blocked you? Come on, stop crying like kids, pack your things and come to my house. And he leaves. Xining says to the assistant, call him from your phone. The assistant replies, this is Mr. Ho's private number. Xining is shocked, shows a card, and the assistant says, this is also Mr. Ho's card. Xining says, so, Ho is my husband? The assistant says, I'll tell Mr. Ho right now. And Xining, speaking to Ho on the phone, says, we need to meet for the divorce tomorrow, okay? After hanging up, she says, tomorrow, we'll surprise Ho at the marriage office. The next day, Ho waits outside the marriage office and says when he sees Xining, why did you come from the hospital? Are you still sick? Xining replies, I don't want the divorce. Huo, seeing the blue flower, says, you are my wife. Does that mean I was the grumpy, useless boss? Xining grabs Huo's collar and says, and I was the jabbering employee. Let's get the divorce. And they hug each other. Just then, the assistant comes and says, Shu Yan has been arrested by the police. Grandpa calls Huo and says, where are you? I've come to the hospital to meet you. Huo asks, who told you? Grandpa says, Anna. Huo replies, Grandpa, she's a criminal. Stay away from her. And the call is cut off. Huo and Xining rush to save Grandpa. At the place, Anna ties up Grandpa and calls Huo, saying, if you want to save Grandpa, come quickly. Huo enters the room, and Anna holds a knife to Grandpa. Huo says, I'm ready to give you whatever you want, just leave Grandpa. Anna says, you have to marry me. Xining tries to stop Huo, but he goes to Anna, and Xining takes Grandpa away. Anna says to Huo, now you're mine, we'll die together. Just then, Xining arrives, sees the open window, and gets scared. In the next scene, Huo opens his eyes and tells Xining, I'm fine, I already informed the police. Xining says, Anna has been taken to the mental hospital. Her real name is Ayo. She escaped from the hospital. Huo remembers that outside the office, he helped a mad girl named Ayo, who started loving him from that moment. Just then, Grandpa comes with food and says, you are much better than Xining's husband. You did all this to save her. That boy is useless. Xining replies, Grandpa, that useless boy is right here. Grandpa, shocked, says, no, I think I'm going crazy, and leaves. In the next scene, Huo makes breakfast at Xining's house and wakes her up, saying, wake up quickly. Xining says, let me sleep. Huo tickles Xining to wake her up and says, do you like me now? Xining kisses him and says, I liked you from day one. How could anyone not love such a cute guy? Huo kisses her back and says, I'll always love you. Meanwhile, Anna, in the hospital, looking at Huo's photo, says, you don't like Anna? No problem, I'll become a new girl for you. And with that, the drama ends.